People were saying that there was nothing automatically wrong about having sex before marriage. The birth control pill was available to students at the Student Health Service, and most of the women I know were availing themselves of it. We agreed with the men that premarital sex was not an evil thing for which you would die in eternal damnation. On the other hand, there were an awful lot of love 'em and leave 'em guys. So what exactly were the rules of this game? This was a tough time for women.
American men were still marching off to war. In March 1965, President Johnson began sending ground troops to Vietnam.
Inside the Army base at Oakland, California, a scene reminiscent of the recent past. The years of the Korean and World War II campaigns is reenacted by yet another generation of young Americans.
I looked on Vietnam initially as the country is potentially at risk. Here's another opportunity to demonstrate strength to the communist world, as it were. Our skills, scientific, technical, manufacturing, whatever it might be. What a wonderful opportunity.
Kennedy's famous inaugural address, in which he said, "Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country," was really the rallying cry for my generation, or at least a part of my generation. We were the new Romans who faced the barbarians in the frontiers of the new Rome. I joined the Marines out of that sense of patriotism, and once we were sent to Vietnam, this was all considered to be right and fitting. This is what we were supposed to do.
Silver wings upon their chest, these are men, America's best. 100 men.
Despite the extension of the military draft, Johnson's war in Vietnam enjoyed popular support.
When the Green Beret.
While some young Americans went off to war in Vietnam, others were seeking thrills of a different kind. They rejected American materialism, not for communism, but for love, peace, and rock and roll. All over the country, young men of draft age turned on, tuned in, and dropped out.
It was fun to make people say, "Oh, look at the freaks," or "Isn't a girl or a boy?" or things like that. Unless it was someplace where people were really hostile and wanted to beat you up, it was kind of fun. I to this day think that it's young people's job to horrify older people.
I think first reaction of most of us who were veterans, that were working hard and trying to raise a family, suddenly confronted with a generation that seemed not to give a damn. They wore beads and earrings, and they smoked marijuana, which was a thing to do, and they spoke a different language.
These young Americans rejected the work ethic and monogamy for spontaneity, sensuality, and psychedelic drugs.
There was the cosmic consciousness, there was being God, there was understanding it all now, and I became, in short order, pretty impatient with the rest of the world. They're still having wars, they're doing stupid things.
Mostly, the flower children did their own thing. The police, obliged to play the heavy father, were often totally at a loss.
I really did think the revolution was going to happen. Not necessarily guns and blood. If pressed, I might have had a hard time saying just what I thought was going to happen. The one thing I was fond of saying was there are more of us being born and more of them dying all the time. And I really thought that all we had to do was show them. And once people realized, oh yeah, this is a better way to live, love is much better than war.
The vast majority of Americans spurned youth counterculture. Hollywood film star Ronald Reagan was out to become Republican governor of California.
Feels very good.
Reagan urged a massive effort to win the war in Vietnam.
I have always felt that we should be making an all-out effort to win.
Does that imply you don't think the government is?
Well, I think for quite some time, and I still believe I have agreed with those military men and those who have suggested that perhaps more of a blockade with regard to North Vietnam, the blocking of the harbor and so forth to stop the shipments of munitions in, as well as trying to intercept them on their way south, would be more effective.
More bombing?
Yes.
But protest against the war was growing. There were marches and draft card burnings. The war, these Americans argued, was immoral and unjust.
It felt like we were walking around in a large mass hallucination, sustained by all the politicians, particularly Lyndon Johnson and later by Nixon extremely, based on lies and secrecy, sustained by the media, who were not able to, who couldn't conceive that the whole structure of the United States mentality could be so wrong and so disastrous and so earth-destroying.
I had the opportunity to travel to Vietnam and see firsthand some of the things that were going on, and I studied and read quite a bit about it. I became quite convinced that there just was no basis to be there, and that in time that we could bring the whole country, you know, to that point of view.
At the Oakland Draft Induction Center, Berkeley students organized a blockade, trying to prevent conscripts registering for military service. The army was forced to bus the conscripts in behind a massive police cordon.
I do remember the first time I was maced. That wasn't particularly fun. It was very typical for the police lines there, and the student line is here, and there's sort of this, you know, ritualized back and forth. Well, we're going through this ritualized back and forth, and this guy takes out this can and sprays it in your face, and you're blinded. You know, you feel blinded. You're temporarily blinded. You don't know what the hell. And of course, it never happened before. So if you're temporarily blinded, you don't know. It doesn't come with the word temporary in front of it. You don't know what the hell's happened.
Call it peace or call it treason, call it love or call it reason, but I ain't marching anymore. I ain't marching anymore.
Most Americans still supported President Johnson's war in Vietnam. Some saw the anti-war protesters as little more than traitors.
99% of the people in this country are terrific Americans and disagree entirely with flag burnings, carrying enemy colors, giving medical supplies to the enemy, etc.
Many could not understand why Johnson did not use more of America's massive firepower to end the war. But Johnson did not want to risk a wider conflict.
Johnson's sole motivation was to try, as we say in Texas, to haul ass out of that war. Get out of there. He didn't know how to do it. He could not just unilaterally retreat and take the soldiers out. Then every right-wing enemy would have said, you coward, you poltroon, you disgrace the American nation, and you in a sense spat on its flag because you put your tail between your legs, and you ran.
Johnson's war dragged on. By the end of 1967, there were 500,000 American soldiers in Vietnam.
we had an anti-war rally with a focus on the fact that 28% of the people who were dying on the front lines in Vietnam were black Americans whose same rights were not being recognized in this country. And the whole focus was down with the war, and black people do not serve in the military.
Millions took notice when heavyweight boxing champion Muhammad Ali defied the draft. He declared his allegiance to a non-American cause, Islam.
Shortly put, are the black Muslims taking you for a ride?
I said not black Muslims, Muslims.
I beg your pardon, are the Muslims taking you for a ride?
No, the white people have been taking us for a ride for the past 400 years in America.
In the black ghetto of Oakland, California, activists trained as paramilitaries in what they saw as a civil war against a racist police force. Led by Huey Newton, they called themselves the Black Panthers. Where the peaceniks offered flowers, the Panthers pointed guns.
We took our guns with us to let the police know that we have an equalizer, and we're going to exercise, as Huey used to say, this constitutional right to observe you whether you like it or not. That's what Huey says, right on, Huey. That's what we're doing. But the police at one point says, you have no right to observe me. Huey says, no, California State Supreme Court ruling states that every citizen has the right to stand and observe a police officer carrying out his duty as long as they stand a reasonable distance away. A reasonable distance